At this point, you should feel pretty confident in how Timeline and Cinemachine work. You're going to be facing some challenge lectures now. Don't worry if you get stuck. Try your best to work out the task, but just know there's challenge reviews following the lectures to ensure you're staying on track. We're now going to create our second cutscene. This cutscene will implement similar concepts to the sleeping guard cutscene, but we'll be adding in new features like audio, camera fades, and the ability to interact with the restart menu. With every lecture, these concepts will start to feel more like second nature, and you'll be able to work through problems more quickly and efficiently. The next cutscene that we're going to be working with is the game over cutscene. So for the game over cutscene, similar to the same process that we went through for the sleeping guard, let's go ahead and review the director notes and take a look at what we're actually going to be building. So what we're actually going to be building is this cutscene right here.
Cameras around the columns or underneath the cameras themselves. Oh man, hang in there, Darren. We'll get you out.
Okay, so there's a few things going on in here. So for starters, we have Darren gets caught by the security system, and it cuts to this scene. And you can see here that we made a mistake in the pre-production of this where Darren is still in here. We'll make sure we fix that. So we have camera motion in here where we kind of round about. It's almost like we're on a circular track looking at Darren. And then here we do a cut, and we kind of fade to the ceiling, and then we fade to black. Okay, and then here we have a menu with the ability to restart and quit. So let's go ahead. In this section, in this video, you'll find in your resources folder a link to download this captured PDF. And inside here are our director's notes and the cut. So here we have a fade in, lights flash on Darren as camera tracks around the security guard. So we're probably going to use a dolly track for this to basically get that curved motion to always be looking at Darren. When we get to the end of the track where we're finally facing in front of him, we'll go ahead and we'll do a cut to an overhead shot tracking toward the ceiling as the game fades to black with the ability to restart or quit. So this all starts with blocking our scene and placing our actors. I'll see you in the next video. In this video, we're going to block out our scene and place our actors. Now, where we're going to be placing this is in the center of the Beatrice auction house on the marble floor here. And we're going to do it in between these first two pillars here. So there's two pillars, and then there's the desk and a third pillar. Later in this course, we're going to be adding security cameras, like what you saw previously, onto these pillars. So we want to basically go ahead and place our actors in the center here between them. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up our prefabs folder, drop down our cutscenes, and inside here we have a captured cutscene. Go ahead and drag this into the scene view, and you can use the scene view to kind of map where they are, where they're going to be. And let's go ahead and position them right about here in between these four pillars. And I think this is pretty good. And what we can do, we want to make sure that they are on the floor. And it looks like they are, so I think we're good there. And I think everything is solid. I think it all looks really well. So here, let's go and collapse this, make sure we're cleaned up here. So here we have our captured cutscene, and these are our actors, okay? So if we look at the organization that we did last time, we pretty much renamed it to actors or created an empty object called actors and threw them in. And actually, I believe we just renamed it. So let's go ahead and just start doing that as well. So let's rename this to actors. And from there, what we can do is let's go ahead and create another game object that's going to act as our sleeping guard cutscene, or I'm sorry, our game over cutscene that we're going to be adding a playable director to in the future. So let's go ahead and create a new empty game object, Control-Shift-N. You can also go to hierarchy, create empty, or game object, create empty. And let's rename this to game over cutscene. Set the position to 0, 0, 0. Okay. And let's go ahead and place the actors inside. Okay. And I think we're good. And once on the actors' positions, I believe we can zero those out, although we shouldn't touch them. We're fine. Okay, that's it. We've blocked out our scene. Our actors are in place. If we go ahead and just run this, you'll be able to see here in the scene view that their animations are just going to start playing. And that's because they were pre-rigged and animated outside. It's our job as the directors to compose the shot and get the detail. I'll see you guys in the next video. The next step is to compose our shot. Now, before we get involved with any animating of our virtual cameras, we just want to focus on composing our shot. So we're looking at our end shots. Okay, so what I've done is I've actually included the director notes directly in the project. So if you open up the director notes under your game, The Great Fleece, director notes, here's all of the cutscene director notes. Let's go ahead and open up Captured. And you can see here that our shot here, before we actually cut to the overhead shot, is we're looking at Darren. Now, mind you, we will be rotating around this shot, but we'll focus on that afterwards. What we're worried about is we want the composition of our final shot, and then we'll focus on animating. So here we go. We have our first shot here where we're basically looking at Darren with his hands up, and then we're going to do an aerial shot. Okay, so this is your challenge. I want you to compose these shots. I want you to consider the rule of thirds. I want you to get those corners of the dead zone in line with your subject so that we have some context of what's going on. And I'll see you guys in the challenge review where I show you how I composed my shot. In this challenge review, I'm going to demonstrate how I composed the director's cut. So I'm going to go ahead and take this PDF and I'm going to move it over to my second monitor. I've also found that if you don't have a second monitor, putting this PDF on your mobile device is also a great way to reference it so that you don't have to have it cluttered in your scene. So I'm going to move this over. And the first thing we need to do in order to compose our shot is we need to create virtual cameras. So for the first shot, we're going to use one virtual cam. So let's go to Cinemachine, create virtual camera, and it will create in the hierarchy CM, which stands for Cinemachine, VCam1, which stands for Virtual Cam 1. We can select the virtual cam, move our mouse back into our scene view, and we can go ahead and align our scene view with our game view, or our game view with our scene view using Control-Shift-F, or game object, align with view. So here we go, we have our shot, and let's go ahead and perfect it just a bit. So the director wants to see all three guards, and it looks like we're kind of on the floor looking up at Darren. So kind of like this. Let's go ahead and test it out right here. Control-Shift-F, and let's see. Let's go ahead and shift it up a bit. And let's go ahead and move it back. We may need to reposition the actors a bit, which is also okay. Although actually you might not have to. Let's see here. Let's see what we can do with this. And let's keep pushing back. Okay, so here we go. So in the director's cut, we can see the back of the guard. And then we want to make sure that we see Darren in between the two guards. And right here, we actually have a pretty good shot. So all I need to do now is I want to get, using the rule of thirds, I kind of want to get them in between these corner points. So let's go ahead. I'm going to rotate this a bit. And we still want the next guard in view, but what we can do is we can get one of the subjects in line here. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and increase looking up. And there we go. You'll notice here that the security guard is in line perfectly with these horizontal points. It doesn't necessarily always have to be Darren, but we definitely want to align it. And you can see here Darren's hand is almost in it, which is good enough. So looking at our take versus the director's take, we actually have a pretty similar look, as you can see here. So we aren't too far off from the director's cut, which is perfect. So I'm happy with this result. So what I'm going to do now is focus on the second cut. So let's go ahead and before we begin, let's rename this. So this here will be our first shot, and let's see if there's any director notes for what to name this. This is our, okay, so there is not, so we're gonna go ahead and call this our front shot. Let's call this full shot actually. So we have Cinemachine, we have our full shot. So Cinemachine full shot, and let me just check something on the cutscenes here just to keep consistent naming conventions. Okay, we did use spaces. All right, so here we go. We have a Cinemachine full shot. And then our next take is going to be an aerial shot. So in order to create that, what we need to do is we need to create another virtual cam. So we'll go to Cinemachine, create virtual cam. And the next shot we're going to compose is a virtual cam, or I'm sorry, is a aerial shot using the virtual cam. So let's open up our director's note, and we will be creating an aerial shot where the furthest guard is on the left, and we're looking up down at Darren with the two guards in between. So to create this overhead shot, let's go ahead and select our view in the scene view here, what we're happy with, and I think this looks pretty close to the director's cut. We have the guard on the left and then Darren in between. We might be able to shift it a bit, but for the most part, this seems pretty accurate. And we're going to be eventually panning out and fading to a black to get the menu. So I think I'm happy with this. I'm going to select my camera object, which is the CM VCam1, and I'm going to hit Control-Shift-F. And you'll see here that it went ahead and added the shots. All right, so let's go ahead and zoom out a bit more. So we'll hit Control-Shift-F from here. Okay, and you can see that it is in view, and if we were in full game mode, we have this. So I'd say this is pretty good, because what we're going to be doing, right, is we're going to be going towards the ceiling some more. So this shot here aligns pretty well with the director's cut, so I'm actually very happy with this. We could even go more aerial and go more overhead, so let's actually try that. Let's go ahead and, I'd say position-wise, we're pretty good. Let's go ahead and let's do this. So maybe a bit too much. Ooh, there we go. And Control-Shift-F. Okay, there we go. So I'd say that is pretty accurate of what the director wants. And then that still leaves us plenty of room to bring this camera up. And actually, we're really high, so we can actually drag this down. And that way what we're going to do is we're going to be panning upwards and getting a full view. So we'll start here. I think that actually works out really well. And we can actually go ahead and we can tilt this. Let's get Darren in there. Let's get him in between those corners. And there you go. So I'm actually very happy with this scene. So what I'm going to do now is I have both my shots. I'm going to go ahead and call this CM, so Cinemachine, and we'll go ahead and call this overhead. So CM overhead shot. And we can go ahead and swap between these. So we're going to go from this cut to this. So here's our full shot. We cut, and we're overhead. And we'll be panning up. Alrighty, that wraps up the challenge review on composing our shot. I hope you've used the rule of thirds in a sense to get this aesthetically pleasing shot. In the next section or in the next video, we'll take a look at creating some animations. A really good practice after composing your shot is to organize our cutscene. So right now we have our actors inside this game over cutscene, and then here we have our virtual cams. Now, once we've composed our shot, we should be finished with the amount of virtual cams we're going to have. So it's a good idea to organize them into a virtual cam group, similar to what we did with our previous cutscene. So let's create a new empty game object by going to Control-Shift-N, or hierarchy create game object, empty. And let's rename this to Cinemachine Virtual Cameras. Okay, and you can set this position to 000. And go ahead and drag your CM full shot and your CM overhead shot into it. From there, place this into the game over cutscene. So we have our actors and we have our Cinemachine virtual cameras. We want to make sure that these are in place before we start animating so that we're clean and organized and everything is running locally to their parent. So let's go ahead and check out the full shot, make sure it's good. So click the solo to make it the primary camera and select the CM overhead shot. All right, everything looks good. This wraps up the organization aspect. I'll see you in the next video where we're going to look at animating our actors so that we can use it in timeline. In this video, we're going to animate our actors with timeline so that it's a lot easier for us to develop our shot and animate everything around it. The first thing we need to do is we need to select our game over cutscene game object that has everything inside. This is going to host our playable director, similar to our previous cutscene where it hosts the playable director. So what we do is we select that object, go to the timeline editor, and if you close the timeline editor and you need it back, you can go to Window, Timeline, and you can drag it back down here. Okay, so with the game over cutscene game object selected, we're going to hit create, and this is going to be our game over cutscene timeline. We can go into the Great Fleece, go into game, we have a timeline folder, and we'll go ahead and give it a similar title. So here, this is the game over cutscene timeline. So let's remove cutscene to keep it consistent. This is the game over timeline, and then it will add a playable at the end. Okay, so a few things happened here. We have a game over cutscene, we have our playable director, and we have an animator component. Now we can delete the animator component because we're not going to be animating this object specifically. So let's remove that. We have no animations for this game object that it's on. It just adds this by default. So hit delete, and the timeline as well. We want a clear timeline. The first thing we want to do is we want to get the animations of our actors playing so that we can scroll through and make it easier for us when animating our shot. To do this, we need to add an animation track. So add animation track, and it's looking for an animator component. If we open up our game over cutscene, we have our actors. If we select our actors, there's no animator component here, so it's not going to be this object. But if we look at our captured cutscene position, here's our animator. We need to drag this object to our timeline. So let's drag captured cutscene position, put it in there, and you'll see here that now we can actually access the animation clips if you remember how we did so previously, which was through this hamburger menu. Drop this down, add from animation clip, and we have a selection of animations. But what animation do we need to add? To find out, we can select the captured cutscene position, which has the animator component, and double click the controller, and this will give you the name of the animation. It's this orange animation. Captured animation. So let's hop back into timeline, click on your game over cutscene, the object that has the playable director, drop down this hamburger menu, add from animation clip, and we're looking for captured animation, which is right here. You can also search captured, and you'll see it right here, captured animation, and we should be good to go. From here, we can go back to our scene view, and you can see here in the game view now that if we select our timeline, our game over cutscene, we can now scroll through the animation, which is going to make playing our shot much simpler. So here we go. So this is our full shot, and this is what we're going to be working with. In the next video, we're going to have some challenges coming ahead where you'll be responsible for animating and creating the cuts. I'll see you in the next video. In this challenge, I want you to create the 2 camera cuts that we're going to be working with. Before we actually begin animating our virtual cameras, it's important that we get the cuts in place. So for instance, if we look at this animation, we have a 9.5 second animation here. Darren is putting his hands up, and then that's it. Puts his hands up and then he puts them on his head. So at what point in this do we want to have a cut? So let's go ahead and let me pull up what we're actually going to be building, and let's go ahead and time out where our cut should be. And let's see if there's any indication as well on the director's note. So here's the director's note. Okay, so as soon as his hands go up, we're going to cut to him placing them on his head. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. So right here, his hands are up, and about right here at about 3-second mark, that's when we want to cut to the over the head shot. So we're going to be on the full shot for the solo. Here we go. We're on the full shot. He's putting his hands above his head, and as soon as he actually is about to touch his head, that is when we want to add a cut to the overhead shot. I'll see you guys in the challenge review. In this challenge review, I'm going to demonstrate how I would set up the cinematic cuts. So we know where we want to cut, which is at about this 3-second mark here. As Darren's putting his hands on his head, we want to basically cut and pan up to the ceiling. So to get started animating these cuts, we need to add our Cinemachine brain to our timeline, and the Cinemachine brain is on the main camera. It's this component that allows the main camera to take over the virtual cameras. So to get started, it's really simple. Let's select our game over cutscene, whatever our playable director is, and we will just drag our main camera to the timeline editor. It's going to say Cinemachine track, select that, and you'll see here that it's added the main camera Cinemachine brain. From there, what we can do is we can now right click and add a Cinemachine shot. Add Cinemachine shot clip. By doing that, we can assign in the inspector a virtual camera. So the first shot is our CM full shot, and you'll see here it is. And we can go ahead and we can preview this shot. And we want to make this shot at about right here, right before Darren actually touches his head. We want to go ahead and cut. So at about the 3-second mark, really. So about 3:11 for me. Let's go ahead and cut that. And then that's our shot right here. We want to do CM full shot, and then we're going to, for the rest of the shot, we'll cut to our over the head. So we will right click, add a Cinemachine shot. In the inspector, it's looking for a virtual cam. We'll add the CM overhead shot. And we'll go ahead and make this the length of the clip. And here we go. Now that we have our animation playing, here's our cut. In the next video, we're going to get into animations. In this video, we are going to look at animating our cameras. Now, for our CM full shot, if we look at our captured data, our PDF here for our director's notes, we are fading in, which we'll get to, lights flash on Darren, which they're already doing, and then camera tracks around security guards. So if you remember in the preview that we're going around this guard and getting to this final shot. So to do that, we're going to use what's called a dolly track. And a dolly track is basically a path often used throughout Hollywood that allows you to track an object and move with it or follow it. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a dolly track and set it up. So to create a dolly track, head on over to Cinemachine, create dolly camera with track. Now this is automatically going to create a dolly track one as well as a CM virtual cam one that is connected to the dolly track. Now, because we've already previously set up our camera, let's go ahead and delete the Cinemachine VCam 1, and we'll resync up our full shot with the dolly track. So let's go ahead and look at our dolly track here, and let's rename this to dolly track. We can remove the 1. And I would go ahead and place this inside of your game over cutscene. The hardest part about working with the dolly track that I found is actually finding the dolly track in the scene. So what I recommend doing is we are going to create the waypoints, because right now it doesn't look like anything, but as soon as we add a waypoint to the path, then we actually have a track. So what we can do now is we can go ahead and find this track and bring it into the scene. If I focus in on it, it's going to take me over here, and you might not even be able to see it. You'll see that it has this 0. That is the starting position. So that 0 that you can see here in the scene view, it's the starting position of the track. What we can do is we can add another waypoint. So for example, we can hit this plus icon here in the inspector, and that's going to create another waypoint. And you'll see here that now you have a green virtual track that you can actually see. And we can actually space these out. We can move this and we can space out. Now you can see your dolly track. So once you have the dolly track visible, we'll go ahead and worry about how to tweak it in a minute, but let's go ahead and just take it and let's move it to where it needs to be. So we want to take this dolly track and we want to drag it all the way over here with our actors. Okay. And now what we want to do is we want to lower this down, and we're going to be panning around the third security guard over here in the corner. So let's go ahead and get it positioned on the ground here, and then we'll focus on actually making this the proper shape. All right, so what we want to do is we want to make sure it's on the ground, which it looks like it is. And that's our dolly track here, and we can go ahead and shift it over, and you'll see here that there's 3 anchors. So we have this one here, which controls the second position, and we can go ahead and push this one out to make our dolly track straight. And then there's this third anchor, and what this guy is the tangent. So you can actually modify this one to create curves within your dolly track, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We want to use it to create a curve from, I'd say, about right here, and we want to go around. We want to go around the security guard and then get to our final shot. So let's go ahead and position this accordingly. So here, I'm happy with it starting about right here, I'd say. Starts right here. We're going to go behind the guard. And let's go ahead and get that. All right, and then here, we're going to go behind the guard and forward. All right, and we have this nice curve. So, and I think that's going to look really nice. So we're going to be going around this curve, and you can see here that right now we're going to start at 0, and then we're going to go to 1. And that is the value that we're actually going to be animating on our virtual camera. So the next thing we want to do is we have our dolly track set up and laid out. Now we need to actually hook it up to our virtual cam. And if you want the values that I have for my virtual camera, here they are. I'm at -4.55, -1.9, -90.15 on the transform position. And then I have my waypoints. I have my starting position followed by my end position. Okay, so now we can hook up our camera by going to our virtual cam. You'll see here on the CM full shot, there is a body property, and we're using the transposer. Let's go ahead and select that, drop it down, and select tracked dolly. Right now it's looking for a path. That path is your dolly track. Drag your dolly track into the path. Our path is now hooked up, and you can see here that our CM virtual cam is now on the position, if we solo it, on the position of our dolly cam, of our dolly track. So our dolly track has this position property in its body. If I set it to 1, it would take us to the final point, just like that. It animates between them. So 0 is our starting point, and 1 is our end point. Now, if I had another track on here, so let's say we added another position, so we had 0, 1, and 2, and you can see it got spread out over there. If I click on the overhead shot or the full shot, and I make this a 2, it is now the end of the path. So 0 is the starting point, 1 is the second path, and 2 is the third path. And through the timeline editor, we can animate this path. And you can see that the camera will rotate to that. If I make it solo, you can see here, as I change this, it's going to modify. So here's 1, and here's our start. So we just need the 1. So what I'm going to do is select my dolly track, select this, hit the delete key. Just kidding. Select this minus button here. Okay, so we have our waypoints 0 and 1. In the next video, we are going to animate this. I'll see you then. In this video, we're going to animate our virtual camera along our dolly track. In order to animate it, the first thing we want to do is create an animation track. So select our game over cutscene, which has our playable director, and go to the timeline editor, add animation track. The animation track will then ask for an animator component. So we're going to drag in the camera we want to animate, which is our CM full shot. If it doesn't have an animator component, it will create one for us. On the CM full shot, what we'd like to do now is let's go ahead and animate this camera. So we're going to hit the record button. We're going to select our CM full shot, and our first frame is going to be modifying the body track dolly path position. So the starting position is 0. That's our first frame. And our second frame, or second keyframe, is going to be at the 3-second mark before the cut, and will be at the end of the dolly track. We'll set this to 1. We can go ahead and stop recording, and we should be able to play this back. And as you can see, we now go around Darren, and we get our nice final shot. Now you'll notice that we're really on the floor, and the guards aren't quite on the floor. So what we have an option here of doing is we can actually increase the height of our dolly track a little by simply moving this up a tad bit. So let's select the dolly track. Let's just move it up. So about right there looks really nice. And we can go back to our game over cutscene, and we can preview this. All right, and my preview button has stopped working, so I need to restart Unity. Let's go ahead and preview this. Select our game over cutscene. And as you can see here, we have a beautiful dolly track cut. And that's our cutscene. So in the next video, we will look at having you guys create a pan effect to go towards the ceiling, and then we need to fade to a main menu. So just to review this again, it's going to start out, we're locked on to Darren, we dolly around, and there's our cut. I'll see you guys in the next video. In this challenge, it's now time for you to take control and create the panning effect going to the ceiling. Don't focus on fading to black just yet. That challenge will come later. For now, just focus on when we get to that cut. So if I play this, we dolly around, we cut. At about right now, this entire time, you should be fading to the ceiling throughout the length of this clip. So I'll see you in the challenge review. You should already know how to animate that virtual camera and just make it go towards the ceiling. I'll see you in the review. In this challenge review, we're going to look at how to pan to the ceiling by animating our virtual camera. The first thing we need to do is select our game over cutscene, and we need to add a new animation track. So let's go ahead and add animation track. From there, we'll go into our virtual cameras and we'll drag our over the head shot into the animator slot. If we don't have an animator component, it will create one for us. From there, what we want to do is we will take our CM over the head shot and we'll go ahead and solo this. So here we are. We'll go ahead and create our first frame on this. So let's go ahead to CM virtual cam or game over cutscene. Let's start recording. Let's go to where we cut. So here we are. We're dollying around, and about right here is where we want to start panning up. So our first frame is going to start here, and we'll go ahead and select our overhead shot. And let's just go ahead to create the first frame. We just need to create some sort of movement. So I'll make 11.86 again. And what we can do now is go to the very end where we are here, and let's go ahead and pan up to here. So what we want to do now is find this camera, and ideally we just want to drag it up and back so that we keep the shot. So we drag up, we can go back a bit, up, and go back. Okay, I'd say right about there. And if we actually demo this, if we preview this, you can see here that we actually have a pretty nice pan. So let's go ahead and play it. And you can see here we're going up to the ceiling, and that looks really, really nice. Let's go ahead and preview this whole thing one more time. Here we are. And that's a good looking cutscene. In the next video, we'll look at doing our fade from black to alpha to begin the cutscene and getting into how we add the UI elements. In this challenge, you're going to create the black to fade alpha that we have in the beginning of our cutscenes. Now, similar to our sleeping guard cutscene, you're going to follow the same process where you're going to create a canvas, you're going to animate the image UI component on it. Feel free to use the sleeping guard as a reference, but ultimately, try for yourself to get the result of a half a second black to alpha fade for the intro of our cutscene. Don't focus on the ending of the cutscene, getting in the UI elements. We'll focus on that together. Right now, I want you to focus on just the black to fade. I'll see you in the challenge review. In this challenge review, I'm going to demonstrate how I would set up our black fade to alpha. So to get started, the first thing we need to do is we need to create our black fade. So let's go ahead and create a new UI image component. This will create a new canvas and an image inside it. From here, let's set this to black by selecting the color picker and dragging the alpha all the way to up, all the way to 1, which is 255, and making it a black color. From here, I want it to take up the entire screen, so I'll go ahead and select this anchor, choose the bottom right, and we can go ahead and zero out the left, top, right, and bottom positions to fill the screen. Lastly, I want to make sure that this scales with the screen size of our player and whoever is playing our game. So on our canvas scaler, we're not going to scale with constant pixel size. We're going to scale with screen size. From there, we are set. Okay. So here is our black canvas. We can call this, what did we name the other one? I believe we named this camera fade alpha, so let's go ahead and do that as well. So this is our camera fade alpha. Now this is going to be a canvas dedicated to our sleeping guard cutscene. Oh, I'm sorry, not our sleeping guard cutscene, our game over cutscene. So let's go ahead and place it in there. And for our UI elements that we'll be focusing on later, we're going to go ahead and use the same canvas. Okay, so now that we have our canvas in place, what do we need to do? We need to go from black to alpha within 0.5 seconds of the cutscene beginning. So let's head on over to our game over cutscene. Let's create a new animation track on the timeline editor. Go to add, animation track, and let's go ahead and drag in our camera fade alpha, as this is the object we're going to be animating. Create an animator component on it, hit the record button, and we can go ahead at the start of our scene. We'll place our first keyframe. All we have to do is adjust the alpha slider to get the first frame. We'll go ahead and move to about the 0.5 mark, which is the 0.30. And we'll go ahead and increase the slider to 0, or decrease. We'll go ahead and stop recording. And now we have our fade to black. So let's go ahead, test this out. And you can see here, we have a beautiful looking cutscene with Darren getting captured by our guards. I'll see you guys in the next challenge. In this challenge, I want you to focus on creating the fade to black as we approach the ceiling. So do not focus on the UI elements at this moment, just focus on the actual fade to black. Now, what you can do is you can use the exact same animation that you're using for your current camera fade from black to alpha. And ideally, what you want to do is at the end of the clip, before the end, you want to start going from alpha to black. So go ahead and figure out how you can reanimate this, and I'll see you in the challenge review. In this challenge review, we're going to go ahead and create our alpha to black. So to do that, you want to make sure that you have your game over cutscene selected, whichever object here has our playable director, and that way we can go through our timeline and we can watch it, preview it. So where we want to add this is going to be, I'd say about right here as we go up. We want to start fading here at about the 6 minute and 40 second mark. So not the 6 minute 40, the 6 second 40, the 640 mark. And what we can do now is we can go into our recording mode, and let's go ahead, and we're in record mode. Let's go ahead and select our canvas element, our camera fade alpha, and let's go ahead and create a keyframe. So we're going to go from 0, so just move it to create our first frame, and then by the end we should have about right here, I'd say. Go ahead and have the very end, we'll go ahead and set this to 255. So it's going to be full black. We can go ahead and stop recording and preview this. So here we go. Go and play from the start. Here we have Darren. And that works extremely well. That was perfect. I am very happy with that. If you want it to be a little quicker, you can just move the keyframes closer together. Another thing I want to show you real quickly while we're in this video is this dolly track. It's a lot smoother than yours perhaps, and the reason for that is because I made a change on here, and that change is to the Cinemachine full shot. I actually modified the dead zone on this, on the aim settings. I made the dead zone width to be 0, so you know that way it doesn't get any camera jerkiness. Because remember, as long as it's within the dead zone, it's not going to move the camera. But on our dolly track, we want to always be pierced on Darren when we're moving, so I set that to 0. Okay, good deal. I'll see you guys in the next video where together we're going to go ahead and create the UI elements. In this video, we're going to go ahead and create the UI menu that will appear when we fade to black. So currently, if we select our game over cutscene, when we preview this in timeline, we have our fade to alpha, we dolly track around, we pan up, and then we have a nice fade to black. And what we want to do is when it's fading to black at about this time too, we also want to bring in some UI elements. So how can we do this? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to actually build the UI elements. I've provided some sprites that we can find inside the game view. So if we open up the Great Face folder, the game view, or the game folder, if we hop into sprites, inside here you'll see that there are win-lose menus. So here we have some game over text and a restart button. So here we have a quit button, restart button. So I'm going to go ahead and play what the cutscene is that we're building so that we know what the UI elements should be.
Or underneath the cameras themselves. Oh man, hang in there, Darren. We'll get you out.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and fade in game over with the restart and quit buttons. So let's go ahead. The first thing we need to do, guys, is we need to actually build that menu. So what I'm going to do temporarily so that we can actually see our scene view and game view properly to build this is I'm going to close our animator and our timeline so that I can see this properly. I want to make sure that our elements are properly aligned in our game view. So I'm going to close our animation window. I'm also going to close our timeline window. We'll bring it back later. From here, I'm going to take my game view and I'm going to put it on the bottom. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this UI element. So here we are, we have our canvas, we have our camera fade to alpha, right? And what we want to do now is we want to add in these other buttons. So let's go ahead and add in a UI image, and let's call this game over. This is going to be our game over icon, or game over image. And we'll go ahead and drag the source game over text. So let's actually call this game over text. And it's an image, so game over image, just call it that. Okay, the next thing we want to do is you want to make sure that the image type, you can preserve the aspect ratio, and we'll go ahead and select that. From there, we'll go ahead, everything looks okay. We can keep it dead center, which I think is proper. The next thing we want to do, and if you do want to increase the width and height of this, you should be able to just say 250 by 250, and that looks about right. Okay, so here's our game over. The next thing we have is we will create a UI button. So let's go and create a button, and we'll call this the quit button and the restart button. And I forget which side they are. So 1 second. Okay, restart is on the left, followed by the quit button. All right, so this is going to be our restart button. So we'll call it restart button. And we can go ahead and add a source image to this as well. Right now it's using the default source image UI sprite. We'll just drag our restart button to there. All right, and we can go ahead and position this down a bit to where it needs to be. We will also hit preserve aspect ratio so that it can't stretch. Let's go ahead and position this where it needs to go. So about right here under the game. I'd say center it on the game. -70 is fine. Maybe 67, 66. Okay, I'm happy with, right? All right, I'm happy with here, 60. And we'll go ahead and increase the size of this as well. So maybe about, let's see, 160 by 30. So let's go ahead and make it 200 by 60. There we go. And we'll go ahead and position this lower. So we have our restart text, and we can go and make that a little smaller perhaps. 150. Maybe 100. Okay, happy with that. All right, so here's our restart. And what we can do now is we can actually duplicate this to create our quit. So let's rename this to quit button. All right, and we'll change the restart image to be the quit button. So drag this quit button image into the restart button, and we're good to go. Let's go ahead and move it over. Okay. And I'd say I'm pretty happy with that. So there's our game over screen. We have our restart and quit buttons. All right, and last but not least, what you want to do is in the text field, just clear out the text fields of these buttons. If you drop down the button, you'll see they have a text component. Delete the text inside. All right, so these look good. Now what we can do is we want to basically, through the timeline sequence, we're going to animate these guys. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to take them and we're going to animate their alpha properties. So you can see here, similar to how we did the fade, we can animate these buttons in. So you can fade them in. All right, so that's exactly what we're going to do, except we're going to do it for all three of these elements. We're going to do it for the game over text, the restart, and the quit buttons. Okay, so that was setting up the canvas. I'll see you in the next video where we're going to go ahead and animate this. Now that the UI is set up, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can animate this. If we select our game over cutscene and we want to bring up our playable director or our timeline editor, to do that we can go to Window, Timeline, or we can actually double click in the playable director slot here. By double clicking, that will bring up our timeline editor, and we can go ahead and drag that back down here. So looking at this timeline editor here, if we go ahead and just preview this, you can see here that everything works fine except for the fact that we have the UI text there at all times, right? So ideally what we want to do is at this point, I'd say about right here, we want to start fading in the text. So to do this, it's actually really simple, right? So all we have to do, very similar to what we did before, is we're going to start recording on this camera fade. And at about right here, I'd say probably about right here as it starts getting darker, we want to go ahead and let's go ahead and set those keyframes for these guys. So let's select all of them if we can. I don't know if we actually can do this or not. If we select the game over image, the restart, ooh, you know what, we can. Select all of them, open up the color, set their alphas to 0 to create the first frame. Now one thing you'll notice here is I don't believe it actually created the frame. It might not be able to do that. You might have to do it individually. Let's test this. If you select the game over image to create our first frame, that is really interesting. Oh, you know what? It's because we can't, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording here. The reason why this isn't working is because the object we're animating here is the camera fade object. Okay, so the camera fade object is just this image. It doesn't know about the properties of this image, nor does it care about the properties of this image. So one thing we might be able to do is I think we would have to create multiple animations for this. Let me check something. One thing I believe we can do is we can actually animate the canvas game object as a whole and access the child elements. So to test this, what we can do is we can actually, let's go ahead and go to the beginning of our timeline. We'll keep the camera fade as is, but what I want to do is I want to add a new animation track. And on that animation track, we're going to drag this canvas element. Now, because it doesn't have a animator component, it should have asked you if you wanted to add one. Hit yes. And now we have our canvas here. So where do we want to actually start fading this in? I'd say about right here is when we want to start. So what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and select all of them. Oh, we want to make sure we are in record mode. So let's make sure we're recording. So hit this little red button here. And we need to create our first frame. So let's select the game over image, the restart button, and the quit button. Open up the color picker and let's drag the alpha all the way to 0. And you'll see here that it actually created a keyframe for us. Let's close it. Let's move to the full black page here. So black screen, about right here at the end. And I would say right about here where it's fully black, let's go ahead and get the full fade effect. So let's go ahead and drag it up. So by the time it gets to this point, it will be full opaque. So let's go ahead and test this out. And you can see that works really, really well. So if we go ahead and preview this, I'm going to stop recording, preview this. And we go ahead and fade to black. And there's our UI. So you're more than welcome to adjust this if you wanted to start it sooner. The way you would do that is you would double click the dope sheet here and that will bring up your animation window. And from there you can go ahead and stack this here. And the easiest thing I would say you can do for this canvas is if you want it to take longer or if you want to start sooner, just take the selected frames here. You can drag and select them and just move it down and it will start fading in much earlier. So let's go ahead, shift it down a bit. And you'll see here that when you release it, it should update down here as well. So let's go ahead and test that out. So here's our scene. We're panning up. There we go. That's a lot better. So go ahead and get what you feel is comfortable to you. That gives us our animated menu. I'll see you in the next video. So at this current time, we have this beautiful looking cutscene that we can go ahead and preview. Cuts up. And it fades to our menu. So right now, the last thing I want to do before we move on to our next cutscene is let's go ahead and create some organization. So right now we have our game over cutscene. Let's go ahead and drag this into our cutscene's parent game object, which holds our other cutscenes. And last but not least, you want to, after childing elements, you always want to run it again to make sure everything is running smoothly. And it looks like it is. Okay, so that wraps up the captured cutscene. The last thing we need to do is disable the game object. So game over cutscene, turn the object off, collapse this, and let's go ahead and make our commit. So open up collab, create a comment, created or finished captured cutscene. Hit publish, save your scene. We're good to go. I'll see you in the next video.